All right, we are live, back at it again. Griz Nation, first of all, we want you to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts at. Angel is not here, but we have Josh Clixby here with us, our guru of basketball. Josh, how are you, man?
I'm good.
Good. Better than me with all this snow, man, in Wyoming.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am.
It's
I'm,
nice here. It was sunny and 65 today.
Oh gosh, dude, you're rubbing it in. Oh yeah. Man. Well, our last podcast we went into basketball. We haven't had one for a while, guys. We are going to kind of recap what has happened since our last podcast. We're going to be going over probably 5 games and plus the recent brawl game, and then we're going to kind of give our thoughts and opinions on where we're going, what this team looks like going into Big Sky Conference Tournament week. We only have 3 games left, man. This is the last week. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It went fast.
Flies along. Because I was just looking at because Big Sky Conference came out with the prospective conference tournament, based upon where everybody's at right now.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit crazy to think about it because it was
yeah,
it was on Twitter today. But the interesting thing is I forgot that they had moved the whole conference tournament up to where it actually starts on a weekend and not Monday.
Yeah.
Or actually, last few years, it had started on Tuesday, I think, for the men.
Yeah.
And so
like Wednesday or Thursday now that it starts on, right?
Oh, it ends. That's when it ends. It's now midweek. And I think that was all to make sure that the Big Sky Conference got a prime TV slot for the conference tournament, which had been sort of their complaint in recent years, is that they were always the last weekend of those 2 conference weeks. And it was always a Saturday night game.
Yeah.
And ESPN had gone more to where we'll put you on ESPN News or ESPNU for the conference championship game because we have, ACC, SEC tournament games that we're going to show pretty much all day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that type of deal. And so I just think it was a decision by the conference that, we want to get seen.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways that we're going to do this, we're going to change the scope of the conference tournament just so that we can get, because now they're on ESPN2 for the championship game, and it's I think it's like a 7 or 8 p.m. Mountain tip, I think.
Oh, nice.
If I was looking at it, I could be wrong on that, but it's back in a position where that championship game is going to be not in conflict with the whole host of other, ACC, SEC type deals. They'll get some good eyeballs on it, especially for people who just like watching, conference tournament season.
Exactly. That is the best time of year. Hey guys, well, let's get into it. Let's start with the men first, and then we'll do the ladies after that. The last game that we talked about, I believe, was the Portland State game. They are coming off probably their second worst start of the Big Sky Conference, 3-6. They beat Portland State to be 4-6, and then their next game, I believe, was UNC, and then the NAU. So that was an amazing week. If you have not watched those games against UNC and against Northern Arizona, definitely go check them out just to watch Moody light it up. It was amazing. It was amazing to see him in those games go for like 52 points, really shoot it very well, and basically will us to win in those games. UNC, we squeaked out a really close one with a 67-69 win, which it was really weird because one thing that I saw was we really didn't second chance points were bad. We did not rebound really well. We got, and that's every game. It seems like that, Josh, where we're getting out rebounded at least 8, 9, 10, but they had 11 offensive boards in that game, which, we had about, I think 7 or 8, but they turn those into points, 14 second chance points, which, I think we have a hard time doing in that respect. So,
yeah, I think this has just been, again, that sort of systemic issue that we've had for probably about 4 or 5 years now, that our best post players aren't probably the best positional matchups to go get rebounds.
Yep.
Deshaun Thomas plays away from the basket a lot. Bannon is sort of the same deal, is that you're on the wrong side most commonly of where you're going to get those rebounds from. And so in the way we play defense, it just doesn't lend to it. And, and as long as that we keep doing what we're doing, which is that we're limiting shots, keeping teams in the mid to low 60s for the most part, I think that really, in terms of the recipe, it's going to have to be the recipe until either develops a little bit of an offensive game, because he's a non-entity around the basket,
man.
But he's a really, really good rebounder, and I think it's starting to. He's a good defender, but it's really starting to pick up. Like, there is a reason why he's a good rebounder. He's got really good sense as to where to be. But he's just not in a position offensively a lot to go get those rebounds. So
he is a good plus minus guy, because he does bring some energy. That he's going to be, he's worth some fouls, as you can say. And so it protects our bigs there too. But watching him, they're not going for him down low. And, he has a hard time right now. And I don't know if it's nerves, but catching the ball. And just looking at his arms and stuff, you wouldn't think he would have a hard time catching it. So I think it's just kind of nerves and getting kind of in the flow. But we've got him for another year, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think, we play better when we kind of have him in there at times. Not all the time, but he does give us some rebounding ability and defensive ability that kind of Mac Anderson did, which, Mac is, I feel terrible with him that he's had to have his senior year kind of go like his junior year, where he's just been through injury.
Yeah. And it's just that chronic thing, I think, with Mac Anderson. I think it's the same issue that he had last year. And so you just look at it, that he can just give you minutes right now, but it's going to be real hard for him to give you a lot of minutes. And even against in the Cat Griz game, that's sort of how it is right now. He's a body. Because even before this year, I mean, he was I'm not going to call him a great offensive player, but he was at least serviceable when he was on the floor. But he's not even that now, because he just doesn't have
that lift.
You can tell that he's struggling with lift. He's not getting off the floor nearly as well.
Yeah, he does. So, that NAU game, again, that NAU team, that NAU team just scares me, just because they are a whole lot better than their record seems. And they've got some really good pieces on that team that I think will bode well for them down maybe in the conference tournament. And they've had some games where it has been really close, and they just have not come up on the right side of it.
I think, again, if there's a team that's more snake bitten than the U of M was in close games, it would be Northern Arizona. They are, I think, up until a couple of nights ago, they were like 1 in 10 in games under 5 points, and they had lost a whole host of them. And I think the one that they won was the one that they won on essentially was a last second shot. So but they have probably the best inside outside combo this side of what Montana State has in the conference between Tout and Cone. And I think really they're not a team. I would like to see them on the other side of the bracket.
Yes.
Because if they play well, they're going to be difficult, because Jalen Cone's a difficult guard.
Yeah.
He's a volume shooter. It's sort of like the guy that UNC had probably 4 or 5 years ago that could go out and score 35 points a night type deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wouldn't want to see them on my side of the bracket at all. If I could avoid them, because we don't seem to play very well against them.
No.
And yeah, but they're a lot better than the record indicates. That's a sports cliche, but I do believe it's the case here, which is that that Northern Arizona's a lot better than what they show in terms of record.
Yeah, Northern Arizona, they've had during that game they were 3 for 16, so that kind of boded well for us. Which, we were 11 of 23 from 3-point range, and that kind of saved us, right? The amount of 3-pointers that we got that game, they actually shot a higher field goal percentage than us. They shot, only three free throws, but 100%. We shot 40%, which was really, really weird. That we shot 40%. And then you kind of have to look at volume there too as well. But Aiden Moody's scores 26 points again, 7 of 9 3-point field goal. We got out rebounded again by 7. Very close score from the last game. We beat them 67-66. So it was a crazy game, really good game. If you guys have not seen those, definitely go check those games out. Really, really awesome to see us get some close games and actually come on the other side of that and win those games. And that kind of spurred us.
Yeah. And both of those games, I have always this unsettled feeling when we play Northern Colorado, because again, sort of the same boat that, we just have teams that we play against rather frequently that we just struggle putting away, and Northern Colorado's that. But in both of those games, I mean, I felt like even, under like 2 minutes to go that we have a path forward. It didn't feel like, this sense of impending doom. It's like, okay, I think we know how to close out games.
Yeah.
The Northern Colorado game probably shouldn't have been as close, but again, it's how we play against them. But,
and it always seems like we have like a lead going into it, where there's a time where we have a 10, 12-point lead. And if it's close in that 5-minute mark, it's the other team's going to make it close. And so I don't know if that's just a head thing, if that's how we play, if we just get in crunch time and we can't just get over that hump. But it seems like, and I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like if there's a close game, we've got to have a bigger lead to get through that.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things that sort of conspire to it, which is that, in both the NAU and the UNC game, you have guards for the opposition that are, that in a normal year probably be in a conversation for, first team all conference. I think Jalen Cone ends up being that guy, but between Kuntz and who's the other guy?
Connect or whatever his name is.
Yeah, between both of their perimeter players, they played really good defense on both of those guys for 3/4 of the game.
Yeah.
And so, while a game felt a little bit in control, but you can't keep those guys down forever. Yeah. And they started being more assertive, and so they started looking for their shots a little bit more. And I think that what that lends to is that when those teams finally decide to put the pedal down, it changes a little bit of the complexion of the game in terms of how you defend it. Because the other example is that Weaver State game. Not to go too far forward in the schedule, but that's sort of what happened. It's like, hey, we're gonna take advantage of the matchup now, because we have to.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately in the long run, I think that's a little bit why the games tighten up. I don't know why other teams, like, I think Jalen Cone should be shooting the ball 25 times a night, but he doesn't seem to do it until crunch time. I mean, that guy's pure scorer. I mean, anything inside of half court, I would feel pretty comfortable him shooting it. But that's just my opinion.
Exactly. Going up with that after those games, we're 6-6. We're feeling 500 there for the conference. We go to Idaho State, which kind of was nerve-wracking with me because going into that game, we beat them by 30. Going and playing there, I was like, oh gosh, are we looking ahead because we had Weber State the next game? It was a weird game. It was a low the same kind of amount of points that we were scoring, right? It was 69-61. We had a bigger lead, like we've been talking about, where it probably shouldn't have been that close. We shoot 55% from 3-point range, 10 of 18. They shot horribly, 3 of 18. We shoot pretty decently, 83% from free throw. They shot 85. We did really well with turnovers. When we had 7 turnovers, they had 11. But again, they out-rebounded us by 15. They got 12 second chance points, and that kind of switched it and kept them in that game.
Yeah.
And, we squeaked away. Martin, stepped up that game, had 14 points, 4 rebounds, and really kind of saved us and kind of was a score for us that game.
Well, and I think the other part of it is that, we don't have, like most of the teams in the conference, we don't have a classic big. Yeah. And I still don't think that that's in the pipeline unless we get a transfer. And, and what NAU and Idaho State both have in common is that they have these just absolute mammoth guys in the post.
Yep.
And it causes a lot of problems, especially on the on the defensive end when we're playing defense, is that that you get some sort of an implicit advantage for being 7 feet, and you just bounce that ball around up there a little bit.
Yeah,
and I just think they just in that game it's a little bit where the ball goes. But at the same point, there's only so much you can do as a 6'8" guy trying to box out that behemoth of a guy that Idaho State has. And he's a good post player.
Yeah, he is. He is. He really is a really good post player. We go from that game. We get that game 7-6 going into this Weber State game where a lot of talk on Twitter was, I don't know if you saw it, that somebody put out the tiers, and Weber State was ahead of us and we were in the last tier. And I just really felt like Weber State and Montana are very similar. That game that they got against us at home that shouldn't have been that close in the first place.
Yeah.
And that was a luck of a draw for them to get a win. We hadn't, I don't think we had won at Weber State in the last 4 or 5 years, I believe.
Yeah.
And
that seems about right.
Yeah. And so going into that game, they have a beautiful arena, man. That thing, it did not. I checked how many fans were there. They said 6,000 fans. It did not look like 6,000 fans were in that arena.
Well, it's a large place. Event Center's probably, I think it seats 10, maybe 11. Okay. And so it's it's outside of probably going and playing in Bozeman, probably the most formidable environment you're going to see in the Big Sky Conference.
Yeah.
For the Griz, year in, year out, mostly because there's probably not a team in the conference that supports their program as well as Weber State does night in, night out. It's not been nearly as good in recent years, but still as good as they've been, rather consistently over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
They should have a pretty good following, and Utah is basketball mad.
Yeah.
And so, it just goes to show that, and all, the big 5 colleges and 4 of the big 4 of the 5 colleges are all within 40 miles of each other.
Yeah.
in that Salt Lake City area, and they never have a problem with people going like, I'm just going to go to University of Utah games. No, and Weaver's always had a great following, and so getting wins there, because we traditionally used to go in there back into the Tinkle Kristoviak years that was a little bit of a train wreck. Most years we get boat raced a lot. We just go in there and not shoot well and lose by 15. But we've played there under the cure. Most of the times we've been there, I mean, we've been relatively competitive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, in that game, we come up with a win, 74-69. We shoot the ball very well, 51% total. That Weber State shot the ball very well too, 48%. I think, again, the three ball has been keeping us in games. We shoot 56% from 3-point range. We turn over the ball 16 times, which is it doesn't even feel like these are forced turnovers. It's like us, dribbling off our foot or just throwing lazy passes where it looks like they're handing the ball to them and then just like hand it right to the other team. But we really did really well, which was really surprised me. I know we were bigger than them, but we out rebounded Weber State 33-23 and had more offensive rebounds than they did, and that surprised me because they've got the probably the MVP of the Big Sky Conference in Dylan Jones, who's amazing.
Yeah, and it was one of those games where I felt like, especially, midway, early second half, that this is Weber State's problem the last couple of years is that even before Ray left, is that they have a tendency to be a little bit more sum of their parts, but they don't have a lot to support Jones.
No.
And we effectively in that game took him out much of his offensive presence until about the last 5 minutes of the game, which was sort of inexplicable to me. He didn't put up a lot of shots.
Nope.
He wasn't taking them, and it was one of those weird games where I couldn't sort of figure out what Weber State was trying to do for about 35 minutes of that game. It just didn't make a lot of offensive sense considering where we know our problems are at. It was almost like, well, this is what's been working for us, and we're just going to continue to go in this direction. But, Weber State is either really, really good this year or they are
horrible. Yeah.
Horrible. I mean, they got boat raced, absolutely ran out of the gym in Greeley.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense. But then you consider the fact that before that Weber got into that probably 5 to 10 game stretch where they were holding everybody in the low 50s. If the game accelerates at all, they don't seem to play very good defense.
Yeah.
And if they can't make shots on their end, they're not going to go down. And especially when they were getting a lot of misses in our game, they were not. I mean, it was 1 or 2 passes, and we would have a clean look at 3. And of course, Moody just was outside of his mind. It didn't matter where he was shooting. I mean, he could shoot that ball from Logan, and it was going to go in on that night. So but they didn't take advantage of Jones. I mean, he had his rebounds, and it wasn't until they just started throwing up all sorts of absurd stuff that game tightened back up. Well, and we had a couple of just really just like weird turnovers. Like I think we had one off the foot, one that like hit, I think maybe Okay's hands. And it was like, it just didn't make any sense. And it's like, oh, there goes the ball the other way. And it went suddenly from a 15-point game. Suddenly it was 7.
Yep.
And then they literally couldn't miss.
Yep.
I mean, Martin had his hand up in the, cause their guard was just unbelievable in that last probably, 5 minutes. He had 3 times. It was completely full up in his face, and he was just shooting right over the top of it. Kudos for them to go in, and then Moody hits that.
Well, and he had been shooting like 20% on the year as well from 3-point range. And I was like, yeah, just like normal, right?
Yeah.
You know, have a player, you know, shoot 20% on the year, and then all of a sudden, just like, oh, I can shoot this, right?
Yeah.
Just like NBA type threes where it's
well, and I think that's a little bit of the product of the situation too. They were down by 15, and they needed to get back into it. So you just don't think about it, and you just shoot. It would be like going into a rat ball game, and you're like, well, I don't care, because there's no tension in it. And I think that's what sometimes loosens guys up. Is that I think the mentality is, well, we're way down, and if we don't start making shots, there's just not any way we're going to stay in this game. So what ends up happening is, I think what happened is that they just start shooting confidently, because why? Because if they start guessing on shots and, you know, like, well, I'm going to shoot this, but maybe it's not one I'm fully committed to, you know, then those shots, you know, rim out sometimes, because sometimes it's just the mindset.
Well, and I think that what kind of helped us as well, and, you know, let me know if you agree with this, Josh, is the game that week they had played Montana State before us, and they had, you know, boat raced them, which they beat them by, I think it was like 15, 16 points. So could, you know, their tired legs be a part of that, because that was a big game. They're Montana State is big, and you know, Weber State really isn't that kind of a team.
No, so. and I think again, I think it's the sort of the weird situation the U of M's in this year, which is that I think teams, when you see us on paper, you don't automatically get the assumption that we're not going to out offense anybody in the classic sense. We're not going to go out and score 85 points. And when teams just commit to doing one or two things against us, you know, there's that idea that maybe we won't execute nearly as good. And I think what the difference is this year is that we have, up until I think it's been probably 4 or even 5 years, that we've shot this well from three.
Oh yeah.
And I think the biggest difference now is that how teams have chosen to defend us, especially with Bannon.
Yeah.
Which is that they rotate all to the middle and away from him, which is, you know, why they started pulling him out of the post, because he can't get that shot. The shot, his preferred left hand, you know, baby hook type deal, he can't get it. And he's forced to pass out of it. And so I think what's happened is that we shoot with so much more confidence, whether it's Vasquez, Moody, Thomas, is that when we're shooting in flow, we're not praying that ball is going to go in. We feel pretty good about it going in. I mean, we're shooting it, you know, up until, you know, Saturday night, you know, we had been shooting at, you know, in the mid to low 40s for most of our last few games from three. And that is a stark difference than what we had been doing, you know, the last, you know, 4 or 5 years in Missoula with the people we had. We just couldn't shoot it.
Yeah, well, it just feels like also that we really didn't want to shoot threes the last couple of years as well. That, you know, I don't know if it was coaching staff or what, but the three ball was not a shot that was wanting to be shot during those years as well.
Well, and when you look at it, and I made this point on Twitter, that, and I think it's true, which is that when you look at the totality of the last 2 or 3 years, we didn't have guys who were in the flow 3-point shooters.
Yeah.
That's definitely Moody. Moody is the best pure 3 guy we've had in a good many years. And he can shoot in flow from anywhere on the floor. And it used to be we had to run, you know, guys through 18 picks, and it was always last second and never early in the shot clock. And so it was just always a product of, well, this is our last preferred option. And it's not the way this year, because both Thomas and Moody have all of the freedom to shoot early in the shot clock.
Yeah.
And I think that's helped on how teams are defending us, because now they have to play a little bit tighter, and it frees up ball movement through the middle of the key, which we've been getting now more consistently the last 4 or 5 games.
Yeah. We come off that Weber State game, and we go into it felt like a year, but it was only a week where we had a break for games. Going to that Brawl game, we were trying to get ourselves into better position where I believe we're 8-6 or 8-6. We're right behind Weber State, and kind of we're still hoping that we get one of those, I believe 4 buys, right?
Yeah.
I think they changed it to 4 buys. I thought it was 3 like the last couple of years. Now it's 4, where we're still hoping we get one of those. But, this game, it was ugly.
Yeah.
We wind up losing 68-72. If you have not seen this game, definitely go watch it and see you're going to see a slow up game because of the reffing a little bit. That MSU did get some favorable calls, and it was just how they were calling them. And Josh and I were talking this before we actually went live. And Josh, you said it best: is once you start making those calls, you can't really go back and start calling it a different way.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that like I was telling you before, is that in any given basketball game there are anywhere between 5 and 10 different types of things that you could call on every possession that any team has.
Yeah.
And I think functionally the issue, and this has been sort of my beef for Big Sky Conference basketball for about the last 5 to 10 years, is that there's no consistency week in, week out about how our conference is officiated.
Yeah.
Because we played a similar-ish game against Weber and Idaho State, and the games moved along, and there was flow and there was movement, and there was none of that in the first half. And I've seen quite a few basketball games in my life, and I'm not sure that I'd ever really seen a team shoot 26 free throws in the first half.
No.
And and the fact that you hold a team without a field goal for 10 minutes, and yet they go into half with a 9-point lead is just absolutely astounding to me.
Yeah.
But again, you just sort of have to play with the hand you're dealt. But everything that happened in the first half of that game against Montana State played spectacularly into Montana State's hands, which is let's play 90 feet one direction. We're going to keep them in front of us. It's almost like a prevent style defense. You don't get access to the key. They're not going to let you have it, no matter how hard you try. They have so much length, and so when you just shorten that game down to where you're only going from essentially they're allowed to set their defense every single time, you're going to struggle against scoring against them. That's why they're the second best team in the conference scoring points per game wise.
Yeah.
You just can't get access to the key, and they defend so hard on the perimeter. And so when you have no flow to the game, where you're not operating in truer space, that game slowed down and could not have worked out better for Montana State. And you give them credit. I mean, they shot 26 free throws in the first half, and they made 22 of them.
Yeah.
Including a guy in Osabor who's a 64% free throw shooter, I think he ended up 14 of 18 or something for the game.
It was
so
crazy.
Kudos to him. I mean, they executed, because if Montana State doesn't hit it 75% of their free throws during that game, we're probably talking about a little bit different result, but it wasn't like a hack-a-shack philosophy here.
No, and Montana State, they did a really good job of making sure that their kind of ball was played. They were the more aggressive, but we were being aggressive. But how they were playing defense and getting into our guards, pressuring our guards, and really making it uncomfortable. And we helped them with the amount of turnovers that we just gave to them and the fast break points. that they got. It was really weird because you look at like points in the paint. We outscored them points in the paint 28-18. And you don't think that that's going to happen. Well, they got a lot of their points off of the free throw line.
Yeah.
They didn't have to. The points off of turnovers was 11-18, and a lot of those turnover points were in that first half.
Yeah.
Where in that first probably 12-minute range where we were just giving them the ball, and they were going down and just laying it up. Both teams had more personal fouls in the game than baskets, which Montana State only had 17 made shots in the whole game.
Yeah, and I think what this comes down to is that you look at style of play. If Montana's going to beat Montana State, and you look at both of the games that they played, we played Montana State's game that whole way through that first game, and still were fine. Up until that, the end of that game, we're in control.
Yeah.
You felt, we were within distance to win that game.
Yep.
And then the Saturday night game got away from us a little bit right after half as the flow picked up.
Yep.
And as the flow picked up, they made, a couple more threes, and suddenly we're out to, upwards of about a 14-point lead. But really after that, we were clearly better when because we're a better transitional defensive team than Montana State is.
Yeah.
And we defend a lot better in flow, where they don't have the ability to anchor their offense around getting the ball through Osabor or Bello. And because they weren't able to do that nearly as effectively, call it controlled chaos, whatever you want, the second half started to look a lot better in our favor because they started missing shots, and we were able to turn that and flip it down to go down in the other end of the floor, and they weren't able to set their defense nearly as effectively or quickly. And suddenly there was a lot more space on that floor to be had.
Yeah.
And so, it sort of comes to, if Montana has to play at a game at a style against Montana State, we pretty much have an overwhelming sense of, well, here's what we know can't happen, which is, because that's 2.5 games really where they were allowed to control the tempo a little bit, and it definitely favors them. I mean, if that game is played in the low 60s, Montana State wins that probably 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, one, you look at just the 3-point, we were shooting a lot more 3-pointers in the last 5 games up to this point. We only shoot 13, only make 5 of them, which I thought, we would have shot a lot more. Deshaun Thomas got into foul trouble early, and I think that was the Montana State's kind of profile is if you get him out, then you've got one of the 3 heads that shoot it really, really well that you don't have to worry about. And just took him out of the game, which, you can kind of look at those fouls and say, those are kind of iffy calls. And, especially the Moody foul that he got, that offensive foul just bugs me because he's coming off of a screen and coming around and shooting it. Yeah, he does kick his legs, but he always kicks his legs a little bit. Which you could have called it both ways, where he gets hit and makes it. You could have called that a 3-point play as well, and then one. And we talked about this too, Josh, is just the amount of offensive fouls that were called on us in that first half as well that just took us out of the game as well.
Yeah, and I think really what it comes down to, and this is just a general officiating critique more so than it is anything, is that where are you getting your advantage from? In basketball, if it's a clear move, and that was the only thing that I was just truly boggled by the Moody call, is there was no advantage from it. He didn't even really make contact with the guy.
No.
Especially when you, like, somebody else had shown a video on Twitter. I don't think he ever made contact with the guy.
Nope.
And
because the guy was
so
on
you're anticipating a call, and him sticking his leg out doesn't alter the fact that he had a clean look at 3.
Yep.
And you're basically creating a situation based upon what you think you see.
A lot of those fouls were that too. They guessed and like, oh, they're gonna shoot this shot. They're gonna call it right there, even if they don't even see the touch or the.
And like I said, once the genie's out of the bottle, you've sort of made the conclusion that we're going to officiate this game, because they all have the conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's what you do as a good official. You sit down with your guys in the room before the game and you start talking about how you think the game's going to play out. And which is, they're going to say, well, we know that this game can be physical. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We have to have our eyes in the right place. And like I said, you can call the foul or you don't have to call the foul. Yeah. But it just makes it stylistically awful to watch.
Yeah.
And that's more my complaint, is that, like I said, is that as long as that there's an equitable advantage, which is that for me, if you're going to do the step in and then up, that initiating offensive contact shouldn't, unless it is blatantly altering the shot, you're rewarding, not necessarily, and people use the word aggressive a lot. I'm not sure that it's aggressive. I think it is purposeful and tactical offensive basketball from Montana State's perspective. Yeah. And if they're going to be rewarded for it, then kudos. I would keep going back to it and back to it and back to it. It's just that they were rewarding, in a sense, and it's not cheating or anything else. They were just getting rewarded for what is very simply a basketball move.
Yeah.
It wasn't because there was any more contact than what there was before. It was just simply that they were getting rewarded for making an intentional basketball move to create contact.
Yeah. Well, you look at those
that was my issue.
And if you look at those two at other conferences and all over around the NCAA, are those calls being made? And I've watched a lot of basketball. I have not seen a offensive foul off of a guy shooting a shot where he kicks out. It might happen, but the amount of times that it happens is not. I have not seen as many offensive fouls that they called in that game where there was like anywhere between 4 to 6 offensive fouls that were called on us in that first half.
Yeah, and again, this comes down to that what Montana State forces you to do offensively, because they jump out so hard and defend. That guy goes over the top of the pick a lot. They don't hedge; they just fight through a lot of it, and so it gives you the impression, especially when you're running ball pick, that guy, and a couple of them were legitimately moving screens, but it's where it's happening, which is in most cases right in front of the official, which is that you're going to go out and set that pick on that guy. And the trick is they teach you to get uphill on that pick. But we weren't getting over the top of the pick to when he tries to run through that screen, he's able to slide over the top. So it gives the appearance that it's a moving screen, which I don't know that it necessarily is, but it definitely looks like it. Mm-hmm. So, and it's because of how they will fight over some of those screens rather than going under it. If he goes under it, they're never going to call that. Yeah. But if it goes over the top, it just looks like we're hanging our knee out, and that's the impression it gives. Which, by the rule of the law, that it is what it appears. But they're fighting so much over the top of that pick that that's one of those. It happens. And it's I would call it more bad luck, because I think you end up in games where that might be, called maybe once or twice a game, and other games it might be called none, and other games it might be called, like in ours, which 6 or 7 times a total.
Yeah. So
and it is what it is. So you just sort of have to deal with it and move on. It just it further in that first half just further bogged the game down for us.
Yep.
It turned it even slower and slower and slower. And when shots were coming in a minimum in that environment, we had to take advantage of it, and we just didn't.
Well, and then you got to give the guys credit too for bouncing back, because they had a 10, 12-point lead. They bounce back, they make it a game, and we lose by 4. But we're on to better things. We've got this last week, man. Here are the standings. If I'm gonna show this to everybody, if you can see that on YouTube, it's crazy that Eastern Washington has not lost. They're 15-0, and you've got Montana State at 12-3. Weber State at 10-5, and then us at 8-7. Then Sac State, where did that is just nuts that they are 6-9, and they have fallen from the graces of basketball lore. It's crazy to see that kind of momentum and that break in the top 4 teams.
Well, it's sort of parting out sort of way you had thought it might have, which is that I thought at the beginning of the year, I think still for me is just, I thought Eastern would be okay. I didn't think they were going to be 15-0 and tied for the best start in conference history. That type of deal. I didn't see that coming. But at the same point, I feel like, Montana State, Weber State, Montana, and then maybe even Sacramento State are essentially, teams that have certain strengths and a lot of warts. And so I think that's why you see, especially, because we could just as easily be right now either, 6-10 or ish, or 12-3.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So the margin between Weber State all the way down to probably Sac State or even Portland State, for me, they're interchangeable parts.
Yeah.
I don't think that after Montana State and Eastern, I'm not entirely sure that, there's a clear cut, here's the cream and everybody else. I just think for the middle, it's just a lot of the same.
Well, and I think, even though, Eastern's 15-0, I think they are beatable. They're not a team where you're going to be like, oh, wow, they have a lot of, they don't have any holes. I think they do have some holes. I think they have done really well on the road, and they've done really well closing games out, right?
Yeah.
They've played some close games as well, and they've just done what they do, right?
Yeah.
And they've got a big advantage of their guys being so long, that creates a huge advantage. Then if they don't have their smallest guy is 6'6", it creates an advantage that no one else has.
Yeah, and I think what it comes down to is that they're leaning into what they know they're good at, which is they're one of the best perimeter shooting teams in the conference.
Yep. And
you can't go big with them because they're just going to beat you off the dribble. And they, like in our first game with them, their 6'8" post player, has, a field day.
Yeah.
And then that next game, it was a little bit of the inverse of that, which is that, that was a 3 to 7 point game for most of it.
Yeah.
And they just have too many guys that, that all can make that shot.
Yeah.
And they shoot so many threes.
Yep.
I think, I'm not sure that there's a team outside of maybe the U of M that shoots more than Eastern does. And they make
them, and if they don't, they get the rebound off of them as well, which that just kills your mentality. And most of the time, when you get a rebound off of a 3-point basket, I know that I was taught you pass it back out to another 3-point shot because they're not going to be looking for it. And most of the time you're going to be getting a better shot.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, on that Monday night game when Montana State goes and plays Eastern.
Yeah.
Because I feel like stylistically, Eastern didn't seem to struggle with them as much as other teams have. And I feel like, maybe that there's a little bit of a different answer that Montana State might have for them.
Yeah.
Because nobody else, I mean, very few teams have played them within 5 points for much of the conference season. And so it's just a matter of, my guess is that they probably end up, 17-1. I think if there's a game they lose, it's going to be that Montana State game.
And I'm
right at the end of the year, because it's the third game of the week.
Yeah, it's that Monday. I'm trying to go into their schedule to see who they play this week, because I don't see them losing any of the games except for that Monday, possibly that Monday game. But also, they play Weber State. They play at Weber State, which might be a game, and then Idaho's at Idaho State, and then Montana State at home.
Yeah. And so I feel like, if we look at it, we've got one weekend left, for me, I look at, who Montana has to play.
Yep. I got that.
They've got two home games.
Yep.
And Portland State for me is still the weirder of the two matchups but I think based upon how we've been playing lately and how we've been playing offensively, I think that game probably doesn't make me feel as weird about it, because the last couple of years we've played Portland State or Sacramento State late in the year, and we just haven't played well.
Yeah. It'll be interesting, those games, because I think Portland State is kind of a tricky one where they're a little bit more faster paced. They're pressuring us. Sacramento State, they've got just that big guy, oh my gosh, in the middle. And they just it's kind of a hard matchup there too. And then you got to go Idaho, and they've got some players there too. They haven't had a very good season, but that's kind of leery too. Is you don't want to go to Idaho and lose to one of the lesser teams in the Big Sky going into the Big Sky tournament.
Yeah, Idaho's got some problems, and if I listen to the Tubs at the Club guy every once in a while, and they've both said the same thing, is that they've got two of the better rated players in the conference.
Yeah.
And yet one night they can be competitive with anybody, and then they get blown out by Northern Arizona by 25. So, I don't know how much longer Claus lasts there. It's they have enough talent to be a little bit more competitive than they have been. It's a better matchup for us, even though that they've got what's his butt in the post, who's a really dang good basketball player. But I feel like in the way that those games work out, that's not the worst third game of 3 games in 5 nights.
Yeah.
It's on the road. It's that new gym, that they play at is, it's a really cool place. I mean, I give them credit for that. I mean, they did a heck of a job on it, but I feel like if you're looking at how you could end up the season ideally, because you got the 2 games, that they get the Sac State at home.
Yep.
And I feel like that we'll play better against them here than anything. And I feel like that we could actually, end up, winning, 7 of our last 8.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the schedule sets up. And I think we're pretty much at this point, unless, Weber State goes full meltdown, I think we're pretty much locked into that 4. And honestly, it's not the worst environment to be in, because I actually feel like we match up a little bit better against Eastern Washington than we do Weber or Montana State, at least size and physicality wise.
Yeah, I think so too. And it just kind of, you look at the schedule or the standings, and you go, okay, well, if we're going to be locked into that 4 range, we're going to be playing probably either Sacramento State, Portland State, our first game. Because I think it's a 4-5 game, right? First.
Yeah.
And then you play the number 1 team, I believe. I don't know, have the bracket with me.
But... Well, the way that they did it this year is that the one seed will play the lowest remaining, or whatever it is, that low pair game on the second night.
Okay.
And then they get a day off.
Oh, okay.
And then, because of how they've staggered the women's and the men's tournament, at least that's how I saw it. And then then we would have to play as a 4-5 2 nights in a row. We would have to win 3 nights in a row, essentially, to win the conference tournament. Whereas really Eastern and Montana State may only have to win 2.
2, yeah.
And I think they did that in part because the old format of 3 and 4 was, we're not rewarding the first seed or the second seed all that much by doing it the way they did it before, which was going to they went Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
And everybody followed that same format. So I think it's a little bit tweaked.
Okay.
To try to get the thing done by midweek.
Yeah.
And because it starts on a Saturday or maybe a Sunday. And
it starts on March 4th, which is a Saturday, and ends on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, we've got 2 home games left, guys. Portland State, Sac State coming into this Thursday, Saturday, and then our last game is against Idaho on Monday. So definitely, if you're in Missoula, definitely go support the Griz and go watch some games. And then, all these games, I think the Big Sky tournament, except for the championship game, are going to be on ESPN Plus as well. So it's going to be nice for that reason too, is you can watch those games. So I love the ESPN Plus.
This has been, they're getting better and better with the production value.
Yeah.
Of the games.
Yep.
And it's more accessible, and I appreciate that, because it used to be like even when they had it at live site, or at not at a neutral site, it was difficult to get access to those games that weren't. So the fact that these are now all televised and they're easily accessible on ESPN Plus is an added bonus.
Exactly. Well, you want to go into the women's and kind of do a brief recap of the women's. And so I think the last time we talked to was that same kind of schedule, which is, they played Northern Colorado. They wound up winning at Northern Colorado 78-61, which, that Northern Colorado team, bless their hearts, because they've had, I think, like nine of their 10 players are freshmen or sophomores. Yeah. So they're a really young team. And then Northern Arizona, that Northern Arizona team, I think, hopefully I'm saying her name right, Lori Payne, I believe is what her name is, really has that team. I'm really impressed by that Northern Arizona team, how last year they kind of just made that jump, and this year they made that jump as well. We got an overtime victory there, and then we fall short at Idaho State at home, which, if you have not seen that,
that's
last second shot was horrible as well.
Yeah, it was abjectly terrible. But again, I think you run into the same problem with it's just you just get frustrated by it. And when the Big Sky Conference went to the consortium probably about 5 or 6 years ago, the whole hope was, by going in with the Western Officials Association, that they could get more
better quality.
It's just how inconsistent it is
Yeah.
that, and I think part of it is that our schedule is never going to change. This has been for years a Thursday, Saturday league.
Yeah.
And as long as it's a Thursday, Saturday league, you're going to struggle getting, especially on Saturdays, top tier officials. So you either make the argument, well, let's, so really what you look at, what ends up happening is I think you have an environment where you have a lot of inexperience, new to Division One officiating, and I just think it just lends to an environment that it's inconsistent because the officials are not as experienced as seasoned. Because it's as someone had told me, that Idaho State call, that was pure anticipatory. It was they were feeling like, I mean, she was backpedaling away.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Backpedaling away.
Yeah. Well, didn't even have a hand up, I believe.
Nope. She was getting the heck out of there, and she was playing straight up defense.
Yep.
And it was all offensively initiated contact.
Yep.
And so, like I said, and you just could see the expression on everybody's face, like,
oh yeah,
this is a little bit absurd. But I think part of what you've seen the last handful of games with the Lady Griz is that when those freshmen have freshman moments, they don't have somebody else to, consistently pull them along. Because, G Feller, who said today that she's going to take her COVID year and come back next year.
Oh, did she say that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And I think what you're noticing a little bit is that it's really clear that Stump and Koenig can play.
Oh yeah.
It is.
Well, this turnaround that they have made is basically because they put Koenig as the point and had Gina come off the side. Koenig basically has got them into these games, and Libby Stump all year has been amazing, but it's Koenig the game has slowed down for her. I think also another, and sorry to jump in here, but another person on the team that has kind of, jumped into the spotlight is Danny Barsic, which has, you're not going to look at her stat line and be like, wow, she's really scoring, right? But no, but she's giving that depth of where we need it. And earlier in the year, we were getting killed inside because we are getting Keely Burton Oliver in foul trouble, and G Feller was getting in foul trouble, and we had nobody, right?
Yeah.
And so Barsic really gives us that other, not to say big, but the other big presence in there that we can kind of rely on for those rebound in that inside game. Those three, and I think Barsic is a freshman, right? She's from like Helena, isn't
sophomore.
She? Is she a sophomore?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you look at it. I think again in the way that Idaho State game played out, and then even to an extent of how that third quarter into the early part of the fourth quarter of the Montana State game played out, is that they're still missing. And it'll get better next year because those girls, especially those freshmen and sophomores, will have an added year of experience.
Yeah.
But the hope is, that you get some more post presence, because what lost them, that the Cat Griz game, was they were just, Bad Bear had a night.
Yeah.
And it's because she's so much more physical than anybody else we have down low.
Yep.
And one of the things is that our best post defender is also our best offensive player, technically, in G Feller. Yeah. And so I think it just causes problems when you don't have that other option to take some because it really had been early on in the year, really hurting G Feller's offensive game because she's had to work so hard defensively. Yep. And she's not getting the same type of looks, not nearly as fluidly. And I think that's where her presence, Barsic, was that is helped out a ton, because that she's able to take some of it.
Yep.
And she doesn't have to wear, or G Feller doesn't have to wear so much of that physical contact throughout most of the game.
Yeah, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I know G Feller fouled out that game. It'd be interesting to see how many games she's fouled out this year, and I know that she's fouled a lot of them, which kind of probably made her want to come back and kind of have another senior season like the way she wants to. It just can we say that I'm so tired and she's a great player, but Darian White, she's just one of those players that is the floor general, and I'm trying to give compliments here, but I just do not like watching her play against us because she's such a great talent. She just runs the floor, runs that team really well. Hopefully, I think she's a senior, right? I'm praying she's a senior this year.
I think she might have, if she does it, she might have her COVID year.
Oh man, dang COVID.
So what they've done really well, Montana State wise, is that they really only have, when it came down, after all of those girls they lost last year, they only had Bad Bear and White left.
Yep.
And what they've really done is that they've made everything offensively move through Darian White.
Yep.
And then at the same point, it's made everybody on the perimeter that much better.
Yeah, because I wouldn't have. Deedon has had a good year this year.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have given you, and this goes to the, they have two U of M legacy players playing for Montana State, and Beatty and anyway,
is it Dykstra?
No, it's Deedon.
Oh, Deedon. Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
And so the frustrating element is that they were, because of issues short and long term, I think, were given the opportunity to go to Bozeman when I'm not entirely sure what played out there in both cases, but I think in the Beatty's case, there was not mutual interest in the prior regime, from what I've been told, but that could be all just rumor and innuendo. But the fact is that you see those players who are, Lady Griz legacy families, and they're both playing for Montana State and in key positions and making key shots. It does hurt just a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But they've been doing that, and again, this is why I think Benford's the best coach in the conference at this point.
Yeah.
No, anybody else, but that she's found a way with the personnel she has, to take advantage of it, which is that it's Bad Bear and White nightly, and they figured out a way to get them all advantages to get where they need to go, and they score enough, and they're gonna, I think at this point, they're gonna run away with the conference. And
and this year, I think last year they wore down, and here's the standings. They kind of Darian White kind of wore down towards the tournament, and when they got into the tournament this year, they've been playing 9, 10, even possibly 11 ladies on the court, which I think has been on purpose because they want to keep everybody fresh.
Yeah,
which I think will bode well for them if they run the table at the conference tournament. But just looking at these standings, I don't see anything where you're going to get any change. Montana State's probably going to come out with this. They're up 2 games. There's only 3 games left. You've got Northern Arizona 11-5, Sacramento State. Either they haven't played a game, or what in the world? Why do they have one less game? Interesting. It must have.
They might be one of those teams who had the just the odd number. Yeah, so because there's a couple of teams that are like that.
Okay.
Just in how the conference tournament played out. So most teams will play just on how the number of teams. I think there's one team that would only play 2 games.
Oh, okay.
The final weekend, I think, just because of we don't have. It's just how the calendar worked, because I think that's even the case on the men's side.
Yeah.
But any case, what's interesting is I think that the U of M could finish anywhere between 2nd and potentially like 7th.
Yeah.
And they don't have the easiest schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got Sac State on the road. And then, Portland State, who's probably the weakest of the 3.
Yeah.
And then they do get Idaho at home, and they played terribly in Moscow against them early on in the year. But it just for the same reason is that you sort of want to finish off the season going probably 2-1, probably get some
probably a 3 or 4.
A 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Whereas if they go 1-2 or 0-3, then they're looking at, potentially being anywhere between, like I said, between where they're at right now, 4th and probably 7th, just because of how tightly packed that middle is.
And just looking at it, I don't think they're going to go 0-3. I think they'll beat Portland State. I think it'll be a closer game than what it was here. I think they beat them by like 20-something points, was it, or 30 points?
Yeah.
Here, I think I think going into that Sac State game, because I think just going back to the game, that'll be in Missoula. I think that that one will be the decider of those standings of, are you going to be, top 4, top 3? If you get that game against Sac State, you're going to be in that top 3, top 4 range. And then, Idaho just is kind of leery because they're kind of a sneaky team. They haven't had that great of a year this year compared to their standards, but they are 7-8, and they've kind of had it going up until this point where they've kind of got it back to where they were.
Yeah.
Like their stretch, their beginning of their year, they swept both Montana schools, and then they lost. I think it was like 6 or 7 straight games, which is crazy to see that swing. And so they haven't lost many games coming back into this, and they've really got themselves back into this conference, the standings. So it'll be really interesting. I hope that at least go 2-1. I would love to see a 3-0 and finish strong, go into the conference tournament and make some noise. So
well, and I think the difference between the men's side, where I think there's probably 2 very clear cut favorites. It's Montana State, and then a lot of anybody could win it. And I'm not convinced that Montana State is that much better than everybody. They just have probably the best guard in the conference. And that helps. And I think that when it comes to that, it's hard not to bet on Montana State to, be the odds-on favorite to win the women's tournament. But any of the probably 4 or 5 teams below them, if things run right. I like the totality of NAU's team. I think they're deeper. I think they're physically a hard matchup for anybody. And if there's a team that's going to cause Montana State problems, it'll be NAU.
Well, and that just makes me even think that win that the Griz got against NAU was even more impressive, because that was an overtime win in Flagstaff.
That's
hard to do.
Not an easy place to play.
No. And so, going into that, and also kind of going off what you said, Darian White, I would rather play her on a neutral field or a neutral court than at home or something where she's comfortable at. So it kind of, that neutral feel, even though I kind of like, having the tournament back in the day where, the number 1 seed got the tournament at their site, it kind of does lend it to, the barn door is open to anybody that kind of can get it going during that time. It'll be really interesting to see. What do you think that we can make a run here in the women, Lady Griz, and make it to the tournament?
And I think it is for the reasons that we've cited is that I think when you look at it, we have probably two of the best freshman players in the conference.
Oh yeah.
And it's becoming increasingly clear that this has all the feel of a lot of those Selvig teams of the late 90s and early 2000s, where you're like, oh, these people are going to be here and they're going to be really, really good.
Yeah.
For a long chunk. That's what I feel with both Koenig and Stump, and then with what he's bringing in next year.
Oh
not to go into offing, but what I think it lends to is that they clearly have offensive skill.
Yeah.
And they can do it. Like, we're better. This is, like I said, this has been a chronic problem for Lady Griz basketball for 20 years. They've never been able to shoot from the perimeter. Yeah. And that's what got them back in the game on Saturday.
Yep.
Is that they actually can shoot, provided, sometimes it's, they couldn't hit water if they fell out of boat. But at the same point, it's clear that those freshmen, especially when they play with confidence, might be the X factor because they're clearly good enough. And it's just, can they limit like that third quarter against Montana State where absolutely nothing went in, nothing went right.
Yep.
And they went from, down a few to down 12 to 15 into the fourth quarter.
Yeah,
but they willed them back in. But I think they're capable. They can put 40 complete minutes together. They're as good as anybody in the conference.
Well, and if you look at this team, second and third quarter this whole year has been a problem. They've started out first quarter really hot, fourth quarter has been hot, but those second and third quarters is where those teams, get them at. And if you look at just the box score of the brawl game, it's that second quarter. They shot 27% from field goal range, 25 from three. Third quarter, 30% from field goal range. And, they shot 20% from 3-point range. And then they stormed back in the fourth quarter, shooting 47% from the floor, but 60% from 3-point range.
Yeah.
Hit all their free throws. And, they lose by 2, 75-73, which, good for them because it did not look like it was going to go well. And that second quarter, they shot bad, but it was still a game, and that was only a 2-point game going into half. But it was that third quarter where Montana State outscores them 15-7, and they've got to catch up. And it's kind of interesting. You kind of look at that and you say, is that because they have such a young team? Because they're relying a lot on Libby Stump, and they're relying a lot on Matt Koenig. And, Gina, even though she's an older statesman, she's still coming back, I believe, from wasn't it an ACL injury that she hadn't played for a year or so?
Yeah, she had been out. And I think part of the issue, again, is that for as much of improved depth as that they have, there's still probably a piece or two. From being really a complete from
bottom
one down to 7 or 8 on the bench. And I think that's where they struggle, because I think some nights you'll get really, really good performances out of somebody like Burton Oliver, either in a starting role or off the bench, or a handful of others, and then you won't get anything from them for 2 or 3 games.
Yeah.
And I think part of that issue is that some of this is a little bit matchup specific, is that there are certain teams that they match up particularly well with.
Yep.
And and others that they don't match up particularly well with Montana State, and I think that's in part because we don't really have a tried and true guard ball handler.
Yeah.
And right now, I mean, Markson's played much better when she moved to that off guard type position where she can play off of the wing a little bit more.
Yep.
But we struggled in that second and third quarter bringing the ball up. We couldn't get into our offense, and so I think that's where you see some of those freshman issues of sometimes we're trying too hard. And a lot of unforced errors. And I think that's where if they can stop those, 5 to 10 minute stretches of games where they just can't throw it in the ocean. And on top of that, they make mistake after mistake and give a lot of second, just all of those types of things that have
16 caused turnovers.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of that, it's just not knowing, the flow of the game and where to go with the ball. But when they are in flow,
they're tough out.
I don't think they're a very easy team to defend when they're in flow. It's just, it's when they're not, they're really easy.
Exactly. Well, last thoughts, Josh? I
think men-wise, I think it's easy to get pessimistic about the fact that, they lose, 2 games to the Cats inside of,
couple weeks,
2 minutes. I mean, I think it's easy to focus on it. And I think going forward, if you look at the totality of the last 5 or 6 games for the men, this is the best they played in, as a program, depth-wise, everything, getting good performances out of everybody. And it doesn't really matter. It just seems to be interchangeable pieces. And I think going forward, I think if you look at it, I wouldn't want to play them.
Nope.
Because of 2 reasons. I think the first is that Saturday night was the first time that the Griz, who once they got to 67, 68 points, had lost.
Yep.
And it was also the first game that they had given up over 65 or 66 points in the prior 5 in almost a month.
Yeah.
And that was even the blowout loss at Sac State. And so I think they are clearly playing the type of defense that Travis wants them to play. And they're starting to find out ways to get better flow out of the offense. And I think the real litmus test will be that Sac State game.
Yeah.
Because they're a terrible matchup. They're super long.
Yeah.
They play really good defense. And if we come out and play better offensively against Sac State, I think you're going to look at a team that potentially is as good as that upper tier, but without the results.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we get the results, then obviously we're talking about a different story.
One, I just want a better game than what we had at Sac State because that game was just horrible.
7 levels of ugly.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that we, going into this conference tournament, these last games, I wouldn't want to play the Lady Griz or the men. I think they're both kind of in the same spot. The Lady Griz are kind of in a better position to, with their schedule, with where they're at in the conference standings. But they're kind of in the same kind of boat. I think the Lady Griz, they are a little bit younger than what we have. And I think that kind of bodes well for us going into that tournament. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think that this week is going to be really important. And of course it is because you've got 3 games. And but it'll be interesting to see what shuffles I can expect. I think one of the major 4 in the standings for men's basketball are going to lose a game that they shouldn't, right? And that always happens in the Big Sky is one of those powerhouses that you think, oh, well, it should probably just kind of stay the same, right? Eastern Montana, Weber State, Montana. Weber State, I could see losing 2, right? If that happens, hey, we're could move up to 3. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. I can't wait to watch some basketball this weekend. But yeah, thanks, Josh, again. He is our main go-to guy for basketball. Angel couldn't make it with us, but appreciate Josh for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Exactly. Griz Nation, make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts out. You can find us there. And also you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Fido Montana. Get a hold of us. We want to hear from you guys. And I guess go Griz, right?
Yep, absolutely.